Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the lymphatic system chapter lecture. So lymphocytes are the main warriors of the immune system. So we got these leukocytes, and those are white blood cells. And the main ones that I want you to know are the T cells, B cells, and NK cells, which stands for natural killer cells. But sometimes people don't realize that this is also a type of leukocyte. So these are the three that I want you to know. T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes are, they do most of it. When they come from the stem cells, which we mentioned before. So stem cells, they have the ability to differentiate into different types of blood cells, either red blood cells or white blood cells. And we are talking about these cells right here. And when you hit the stem cells with the hormones, right hormones, they can go ahead and make more of these lymphocytes as needed. We usually have very small amounts unless you're suffering from an infection. And when you get sick with an infection, your body will crank out more and they'll fight the pathogen. People who have things like HIV or other types of immune diseases, the reason they get infections more frequently is because they don't have enough of these B and T cells. So whenever you read an article or a newspaper about somebody who has HIV and they talk about their cell count, this is what they're talking about. Their cell counts for B and T are pretty low, and their immune system is going to basically, have not a good response to any infection. So they don't really die from HIV. What they do is die from an infection. So their body cannot fight. And sometimes as simple as a cold or a flu, or just a cut on your skin can actually kill them if they have HIV. And that's because they have really weak immune system and they don't have the ability to fight an infection. So lymphocytes, T and B lymphocytes protect against specific antigens. So B cells, they are going to fight against things they're trying to get into your body, and these are foreign things known as antigens. So these can be bacteria, viruses, toxins, and the toxins that endotoxins, exotoxins that are created by bacteria and so forth. So B cells, this is images just showing you that finds an antigen and then they release a bunch of antibodies. Activated B cell swarms of antibodies to bacterial antigen. So they can go ahead and make antigens. So it could be mismatched. So erythrocytes, for example, if you get a transfusion and then the blood type doesn't match yours, well, guess what's going to happen? It's going to be antigens that are produced by the lymphocytes, which will attack. Sorry, the antibodies produced by the lymphocytes, which will attack the antigens on the red blood cells if it's the wrong type of transfusion. And then we also talked about Rh factor, the newborn baby. So if it doesn't match mom's, then what's going to happen is the antibodies will go ahead and fight it, and it's going to attack the baby. So then we have agglutination, and that happens because of this. The reason why it's called T cells, well, because these will mature in thymus. So you have that gland above the heart. Don't confuse this with thyroid gland. They mature in the thymus. So what they do is they gather information from the thymus, then they mature in the thymus. They're being produced in the bone marrow, but then they travel to the thymus, mature in the thymus. And then they will go to your lymph nodes, and they kind of like sit there like a guard station. So they might head over to your spleen, or they kind of just hang out, wait until you get a signal saying something is attacking your body, and then they go out and try to fight it. So they manage the immune response. They attack and destroy the foreign cells. On the other hand, the B cells, they're called B cells because they mature in the bone marrow. So B stands for bone marrow, T stands for thymus. So they're produced in the bone marrow. They stay in the bone marrow. That's where they get mature. And when they're mature, then they can head off just like the T cells to hang out in the lymph nodes and other places until they're called to duty. So in this case, instead of directly attacking, so T cells, they can attack and destroy foreign cell directly. But the B cells, they do not attack things directly. they hang back. What they do is they actually produce antibodies. And what happens is when you get a vaccine or a flu shot, the flu shot will stimulate your immune response. And there are certain types of flu shots that will stimulate the B cell type. And they put antigens in your body, and those antigens will stimulate those B cells to produce antibodies. And then the antibodies will go in your antibodies in your body will be ready to attack the flu antigen. Um, so if you got the vaccine, you fight against it. That's basically creating memory cells of the flu. So that's going to be stored in the memory cells in the future. If you get the flu, it's going to be a quicker response. So then your body will crank out these antibodies, and these two terms, T cells and B cells, they're referring to the immunity. So the T cells, the reason they're called T cells because they are maturing in the thymus and they're attacking directly. They're attacking the pathogens directly. So that's also the reason they're called cellular immunity. So you can see here, they're called cellular immunity. The reason is because they are directly attacking the pathogens. So that's what's happening. And then the humoral response is the B cell response here. And the way you describe B cells is they don't directly attack the pathogens. You can see they find the antigens, and if they have memory of the antigens, they're going to create antibodies for it. Antibodies go ahead and directly attack the antigen. Whereas opposite is happening here is that these T cells, they're not making any antibodies. They can activate the macrophage cells, and then they just destroy the infected host cells or the viruses. So we also got things like plasma cells here. So plasma cells produce your antibodies. And we talked about these kind of like when you go to war, you got these elite soldiers that are going to be T cells. These elite soldiers will go on the ground, fight hand-to-hand combat. And then you would go, they'll go after the enemy. But then another example for B cells would be maybe you got people or army camps in maybe Las Vegas, and they're sitting in the room. Soldier will be sitting in the room halfway across the world, and they're remotely piloting their drones or something like that. So that would be these antibodies here, and those can do the attacking, and they're going to control the antibodies, and the antibodies are remotely going to attack the foreign body. So you can kind of think of it like that. So that's called humoral immunity. And sometimes it's also called antibody-mediated immunity. That's a little bit more descriptive for it. So they have memory B cells for the future. So the response is quicker. This is that same image from your textbook. It's showing you that you have the humoral immunity, you have the cellular immunity, which is T cells, and the humoral is B cells, which is creating memory cells for the future as well, with the infection and then sending antibodies to attack the antigen. This is another image from your textbook showing you that you got yourself a thymus gland, and we said that your thymus is a gland above your heart, and that thymus gland is producing, or so the T cells are produced in the bone marrow, but then they go to the thymus, they mature in the thymus. On the other hand, the B cells, they are being produced in the bone marrow, and they are staying in the bone marrow. They're maturing in the bone marrow along with the NK cells, and they're going to produce the antibodies that are going to attack the antigens. So that's your humoral or antibody-mediated response, and then you have your cell-mediated response, which is the T cells. So that's cell-mediated, that's antibody-mediated. You're getting these antibodies produced. Those are the main kinds in the lymphatic system. So this is again, same thing, cell mediated. That's going to be the T cells directly attaching to the pathogen. They go in there, sometimes they poke holes in the cell walls of the pathogens, they cause them to die. On the other hand, the antibody-mediated immunity is the B cells, also known as humoral immunity. They're going to be the B cells, which hang back and they make the antibodies, which are going to be attacking the pathogen. So they are killing the pathogen indirectly. And then we also have the NK cells that also directly attack things. So let's head over to the lymphoid tissue before I go into the organs. Let's talk about different types of lymphatic tissue. So we have a body. So in this picture, it's showing you all different places that we talk about in the lymphatic system. So you have lymphocytes. Lympho means lymph is referring to the fluid, cyte is referring to cell. So lymphatic system, there are going to be these cells that are part of the lymphatic system, and there are going to be a lot of places that are just guard stations. That's where these cells are sitting, and so forth. So your B cells, your T cells, they're just gonna sit there, almost like a security guard, and they're just gonna hang out and wait. And that makes sense because you're not always fighting an infection, and most of the time you're healthy. But if you do get infected with something, they get a signal, and the signal would be, either one of the T cells. They'll actually leave the lymph nodes, slip into your circulatory system, and it's pretty amazing that they can actually do that. So they slip into your blood vessels, and then they go to the place where you have the infection, and then stop and take care of the infection. That kind of sounds like you're flowing. Basically, your blood is flowing and you're going however fast. So blood is going however fast it can, and then you're going to reach the location, and you need to stop and get out of a blood vessel, which is lymphatic vessel, and get into the blood vessel to fight the infection. So that's equivalent to saying you're on a moving train, and when you get to your stop, the train doesn't slow down. You just have to get off the train without killing yourself. So that's what these cells are doing, which is really amazing. They're gonna get out where they need to, and they fight the enemy. So they're able to do that, and which is very remarkable that they're able to move around your body like that. So it houses and perforates perforation site for lymphocytes. That's the lymphoid tissue. It furnishes a surveillance vantage point. So these are the cells, and we're going to talk about the tissue. So this one here is called called diffuse lymphatic tissue. And diffuse means they're not in a big clump. So if it was a big clump, then it would be called a nodule or follicle. In this case, they're just all over the place. So this is called diffuse lymphoid tissue, and they're kind of scattered all over the place. And because they're going to be in places like your digestive system, this is showing your colon here, and they're going to be in your respiratory system. This is your esophagus here. And because this is where you come into contact with pathogens, you eat things and then there's bacteria and viruses in your food. It makes sense you got layer of diffuse lymphatic tissue inside your GI tract and also in your lungs and your bronchioles and bronchi and so forth. Because you're breathing all the bacteria and viruses, makes sense you got some diffuse lymphoid tissue in those places. The bad part of this is when you get cancer. If you have cancer or lymphoma, for of your digestive system, or that's called gastric lymphoma. And because this is diffuse, it's really difficult to cut out lymphatic tissue. So if you have gastric lymphoma, you practically need to cut out the entire length of the intestine, and the downside of that is, gastric lymphoma, and it's not fun to cut out all that tissue. So here, instead of being diffused, they're going to be centralized, now concentrated a bit. So you can see that here. And these are called follicles and nodules. So lymphatic follicles or nodules are solid spherical bodies, tightly packed reticular elements and cells. So that's that. and they can form a part of, they may form part of larger lymphoid organs. So they're going to be in there with the diffuse. So in this case, these are a little bit easier to cut off if they become cancerous or they cause problems. So the ones we're gonna focus on is called MALT, and MALT stands for mucosa associated lymphoid tissue, MALT. This is a British spelling for esophagus. So we'll spell it with the E, with an E, but the British spelling is with O. So this is a tube that connects your mouth to your stomach, and um, with your digestive tract, it's going to be mucosa. Um, so mucosa is anything that doesn't have skin over it. So it's going to be something that's going to secrete fluids like mucus and other kinds of things to coat the surface. Mucosa associated lymphoid tissue is going to be in your GI tract and also in your respiratory. So it makes sense that you have mold here and then here, because that's what comes into contact with bacteria in the air and water and food that you eat. So there's your malt. That's the malt. And because you're breathing all this stuff, spores, bacteria, and things like that, there are some specialized places with malt, and these places are going to be called Peyer's patches. So protects against and protects the digestive and respiratory from foreign matter. These are called Peyer patches. Tonsils and the appendix is also a special place. So I'll show you a picture of this in a second over here. The lymphoid nodules are going to be in the walls of your bronchi because you have all that um, because you need place to capture all that. So lymphoid nodules is on the in the walls of bronchi of the respiratory tract, and also because you have cilia there capturing. So the Pierce patches over here, it's going to be in on the intestines. So you can see those here. They kind of um, dome shape. In between is the villi to increase the surface area. So these Pierce patches are these little triangular shaped follicles that are going to be made up of lymphoid tissue, and they're going to be in the walls of intestines. When you eat your food, if acid enzymes don't get the bacteria, then it's going to be the lymphoid tissue that's going to take care of the bacteria. And in the appendix, you're going to also have something very similar. So these are in the wall of distal portion of the small intestine. And try to remember different parts. You know, you have duodenum, jejunum, different parts of the small intestine. So this is in the distal portion. Similar structures are also found in the appendix. However, the appendix, this is showing the appendix, and you can see these again here. So the appendix is not something that's required organ. In old times, they were used to cut it out. Appendix can be removed, and your life would not be affected in any way whatsoever. So before they used to remove it, they thought that it had no function. So now they know that there is some lymphoid tissue in there. So Pierce patches aren't going to destroy um, um, or prevent anything from getting into your body. They're just there to take care of something that's getting in your body. So this generates memory lymphocytes, and this comes into play when you travel or when you eat food that's not you're not familiar with. If you travel to a new location, you might have travels diarrhea, even though you eat food that's what you're familiar with. That's because your maybe Pierce patches has no memory of that kind of bacteria, and when you eat that bacteria with the food, that's the reason you might have gotten sick. But why you don't get sick by eating local foods is because your body has generated memory lymphocytes in order to deal with it. So you go to another country and you eat something that has a different types of bacteria. Now your body doesn't recognize it, and you're gonna have diarrhea. People who think they're lactose intolerant, if you never eat cheese, never drink dairy, and then every now and then you drink like Starbucks, you get diarrhea. It may be because you know you're lactose intolerant, but it also might be because you got no memory of this bacteria in your gut. So if you're not, tuned to drinking or eating dairy very often, and for you to figure out if you are lactose intolerant, just keep on drinking the milk for a couple days, you know, um, straight, and then your gut bacteria will go ahead and form these memory lymphocytes, and then you can go ahead and drink as much milk. And that's because that's what I'm saying is if it's not due to lactose intolerant, but if you're lactose intolerant, then you can't drink or eat dairy. But if it's happening because of the bacteria, then sometimes it does take some time for your body to get used to it. And that's the reason you get travel's diarrhea if your body's not, haven't seen that bacteria before. And then once you do eat that food with the new bacteria and you get travel's diarrhea, but later you will convert, you'll have the memory of that bacteria, and you'll have some local flora and memory lymphocytes. So you'll be okay after that. So they destroy bacteria, preventing them from breaching the intestinal wall. They generate memory lymphocytes. Now let's head over to the organs. The lymph nodes are technically not organs, but they're little structures over here, you can see. And what happened in this picture is that medical professional was able to palpate. Palpate means that you feel, or you're able to kind of feel or touch the area and feel the nodes there. So what they did was they took some stickers, they placed the stickers over the lymph nodes. You guys are probably familiar with the lymph nodes under your mandible. The reason why you feel them or you felt them when you're sick is because these lymph nodes are part of your immune system, and they swell up when you're sick because they're working overtime, and in places where they're very close to you can feel that they got a painful, so they're going to be under your armpit, in the groin area, and you can see how many lymph nodes, but many lymph nodes inside your body are the ones that are closer to the surface. So these small little structures, they are embedded into your connective tissue, and they're going to be connected to all the lymphatic vessels. And these lymph nodes are going to be doing the filtering. And so they're just, and the white blood cells just hang in there. So they're embedded in the connective tissue in clusters, and they're near body surface in inguinal, axillary, which is your armpit area, and cervical regions of the body. So the ones you need to know about are shown in this image. And these are little discrete structures that are going to be lymph nodes. And so you've got some in your cervical area, cervical lymph nodes. And then you have under your armpit, that's axillary. Axillary means armpit again. And then the groin ones are called inguinal. And these are, so because the line that's between thigh and your groin, these are called inguinal. And then these lymph nodes are very close to the surface. They do get swollen when you get sick. And so those are the ones that are being shown here. And then you also have some mesenteric lymph nodes. I guess those are not on this photo. So those are in the intestines. Mesenteric refers to the intestines. So there are a bunch of them there, and you can actually see them here. So I want people to be able to identify and recognize. We have a model in class that we're going to look at and label these. So these are going to be clusters of nodes that you can find in your body. As I mentioned before, when you get sick, your lymph nodes, they become swollen. This is a normal lymph node. This is a swollen lymph node. And basically unfiltered lymph enters, and lymph nodes filter them, removes waste products and some fluid, and kills pathogens and cancer cells. So if you're fighting an infection, this is filtering your lymph, and that's there are all kinds of dead bacteria and viruses that are broken down. They're going to end up in the lymph nodes. That's the reason they're swollen. And your lymphocytes are going to be hanging out in the lymph nodes, almost like at a guard station, and doing watch, and then they're gonna hang out there and wait for a signal. Once you're invaded with a pathogen, then they get activated and they'll take care of the invaders or the pathogen. So they filter the lymph, macrophages destroy microorganisms and debris. Immune response lymphocytes are activated and amount to attack against antigens. So they are bean shaped. They're shaped like a bean, almost like a little kidney. You can see that here. And you got this portion that's called cortex. This is called the cortex, the one in blue. Middle part is called medulla. You'll see that many times we have this cortex label and then a medulla label for the middle part for many organs. We saw also this in adrenal gland. So I think we might have some slides of this in the lab. And then you're gonna look at it under the microscope, and then we'll test you on it for the exam. So for the cortex and medulla. There's a nice little cartoon drawing that's you'll notice that it has multiple lymphatic vessels that are going into and out of the lymph nodes. That's middle part is medulla and the outer part is cortex. These are the lymphatic vessels, and you can see the valves on them. So these are going into the lymph nodes and exiting. So they're going to be lymphatic vessels, and you will see that efferent lymphatic vessel stands for exiting, E for exiting, afferent lymphatic vessels are entering. You can also try to remember these from the kidney. We had afferent and efferent in kidney as well. So E for exit. Try to remember that efferent, E for exit. Therefore, the lymphatic vessel is going to have an exit, and the so when we get to the urinary system, same thing kind of happens. You have the cortex, you have medulla, you have afferent, you have efferent. So lots of stuff, you'll see it many times when we're naming the structures. If we had a cadaver, we could, try to dissect some out, but it's very difficult. Very, very difficult. So these are found throughout your body. And now we're going to look at another organ that's called the spleen. The spleen is going to be on the left side. The left side, this is asymmetrical, so it's only on the left side, and it's described as being a bag of blood. So the spleen, it's a big bag, it's very loose structure that's filled with lots of blood. And the reason why blood is in there, because this is a site where blood is either cleansed or it's being recycled. So when you got erythrocytes, they reach end of their life cycle, which is about 4 to 5 months, then they just die and break down. So when they break down, they end up either going into the spleen or the liver. And when they break down further, the spleen and the liver will go ahead and recycle those chemicals and those chemicals end up in your intestines as a bile. And then the spleen, these get broken down into the materials that produce more blood cells. So in the liver, broken down to bile, and gallbladder. So, but in the spleen, they get broken down and get recycled. So site of lymphocyte perfilation, immune surveillance and response cleanses the blood of aged cells and platelets and debris. So one of the characteristics for the spleen, it's going to be under very low pressure. So there's one characteristic of the spleen that also explains why it's easy for spleen to rupture. It's on the left side of your body. If you get hit there with something maybe like an airbag, you're falling, you hit your left side really hard, the spleen's gonna rupture and the blood will bleed out. And a ruptured spleen can rupture very easily. And you never hear that, about kidney. That's because the kidneys are under high pressure. It's an organ that can take high pressure. The spleen, on the other hand, is under low pressure. And you'll notice that you got this artery that's called splenic artery. And I want you to notice how it's all twisty. There are so many twists in this artery. It's really long, and the reason it's long and twisty, it's to slow down the blood. It's trying to reduce pressure. of the blood before it finally gets to this into the spleen. And if you have your textbook handy right now, go ahead and look at the renal artery. It's going to be the one that's going into the kidney, and it's going to be very short, and it's not going to have all these twists and turns. And that's because it wants to maintain high pressure of the blood going into the kidney in order for it to filter it. So here you can see the splenic artery, and it has lots of twists and turns. So summary of all the functions of spleen is stores and breaks down erythrocytes, and it stores and breaks down erythrocytes for later reuse. It can store platelets, and its site of fetal erythrocyte production normally ceases after birth. So fetus relies on bone marrow in order for to make blood, but spleen can also actually take over and produce some of the erythrocytes for the fetus. And also going to contain leukocytes and lymphocytes and macrophages and things of that sort. And they're going to hang out there until you get an infection, the leukocytes. This is what it looks like under the microscope. It's going to have this dark tissue, and it has fibrosis capsule and trabeculae. And then every now and then the fibrous capsule make its way in, and it's going to create these little divisions called trabeculae. And we will have this on our list of slides to look at when you go to the lab. The next organ is going to be this guy, the thymus. The thymus, and that's your thyroid gland. Do not confuse thyroid gland with the thymus gland. Thymus is the one right above your heart. And the thyroid is the one that's going to be on the trachea here. So it's underneath the larynx. The thymus gland is on the other hand. Sounds very similar, but it sits above the heart. So when we do dissections, I don't know if we have any dissections for that actually. Sometimes we do dissections of the cadavers for some of the courses, but sometimes we do not have dissections. So for some animals, this thymus gland is actually going to be in three pieces. One part is going to be above the heart, and then you have other part that's running parallel to the trachea. But for the humans, that's not the case. We have ourselves the bone marrow. So the bone marrow is going to produce B cells and T cells, but the T lymphocytes, they do get produced in the bone marrow, but then they go to the thymus for maturation and become immunocompetent. And it does not directly fight. The thymus gland does not directly fight the pathogens. T lymphocytes, they mature in the thymus gland, and then they go and collect information. The thymus is going to survey, is going to go ahead and, check for the antigens. But and then when there's infection, it's going to bring all these chemicals. And if you have T cells there, it's going to basically fight the antigens. But the thymus gland itself is not directly fighting any pathogens or antigens. Now, what's really interesting is the size of the thymus changes with age. When you're young, the thymus gland is going to be really large. So right here, you can see there's medulla, there's cortex, there's some fat over it. And this is when you're born, it's going to be very large. And as you age, so the really young people, they have large in proportion to your body. So newborns, they say thymus gland in newborns is as big as their fists. So the newborn baby's fist, that's how big their thymus gland is. As you get older, the cortex, it starts to shrink. And what's going to happen is that medulla also shrinks, and there's more fat over it. So when you're young, your thymus gland is large because it's going out there sampling and surveying your environment, basically making your immune system. So when you get older, the thymus gland starts to become smaller in proportion. That means you're not going to be as, it's not going to be as useful as it was when you were very young. So what's happening here is if you go ahead and do a study on kids, that were raised on farms and ranches, and compared it to the kids who were raised in city, the city kids they end up having more allergies. They just have much higher incidence of allergies compared to the kids who were raised on farms and ranches. They have much lower instances of allergies. So city kids, they're just, continuously using hand sanitizer, washing their hands. They never really go out in nature, or as not as much as the kids who are raised on a farm. And they stay in their apartments, breathing the air conditioned air. And because they never get exposed to these antigens, their immune system is kind of weak. As they get older, they have lots of allergies. On the other hand, the kids that are born on the farms and ranches, they're constantly out there, breathing in pollen, tree pollen, handling air animals, cows and sheep and things like that. So their immune system is making their immune response is making their immune system more strong. So when they're adults, they don't suffer from allergies as much. Um, there was a immunologist, and he said there was a reason that he had a dog, and the reason was that he wanted his kids to be exposed to the antigens that dog brings into the house. Dog has to go out, pee, poop every day. Go out there, the dog, and then they collect all this stuff, bring it into the house, and expose the kids to that stuff. So that makes the immune system a little bit better or mature. So this size changes with age. It increases in size, and the most active during childhood. And then you can notice as you age, the size gets smaller. Stops growing during adolescence and gradually atrophies. Okay, so over here, it's the back of your mouth, and you've got several places that are called tonsils. These tonsils are going to be part of your immune system, and these are going to go ahead and track and destroy bacteria. This is the reason why sometimes if it gets swollen, if you have an infection, that's because all the bacteria is heading over there, and it's kind of being filtered out by these tonsils. There are a few of them, and you need to know them. You have the palatine tonsil here, that's on the sides, um, back of your mouth, and then it's going to be on the soft palate. And then you got one in the back that's called pharyngeal tonsil. And then this one is lingual tonsil, that is lingual means tongue. So that's called lingual tonsil. So you want on top as the hard palate, that's going to be pharyngeal, is under your tongue, and the palatine is on the soft palate. So there's another one that's called tubal tonsil. Tubal tonsils. That's going to be in the pharynx. So in the past, people would have tonsils removed, and for no reason at all. They don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore, because they didn't know there was a function for the tonsils, but now they know more. So if your tonsil are swollen, you're surgically, um, they would surgically remove it, and um, now they don't remove it. The only reason they might remove it is maybe, um, it's going to suffocate you because they're so swollen. Um, so they might reduce the swelling, but if it keeps happening, they do remove the tonsils, especially because if they get swollen at nighttime, you can actually asphyxiate. So if that happens, it's safer for them to remove the tonsils. So these are the tubal tonsils. Let me see. So these are the tubal tonsils that you can see here. So tubal tonsil is going to be in the pharynx. Then we have the histology of the tonsils. This is what it looks like under the microscope. I don't think we have this slide, so don't worry about it. We do have a model of a head cross section that shows all the tonsils. So you'll need to memorize all these different kinds of tonsils. And that's it for the lymphatic system. And hopefully you guys know a little bit more about T cells and B cells function now.